Hello everyone, this is Caleb Simpson, and you're watching my walkthrough for Chrono Trigger for Nintendo DS. This video covers the chapter titled Unnatural Selection, in which we tackle the prehistoric dungeon, Tyrano Lair. First of all, I'm going to spend all of my capsules/tabs and feed them to my characters. Now, as far as the strength capsules, the character I'd highly recommend you put that on would be Frog. He currently has the lowest stats, so he's going to be the one who's going to lag behind as far as that goes. So boosting it a little bit on him makes a big difference. It's really nice, and it makes him a little bit more viable. So instead of a jack of all trades, he's just a little bit nicer, makes him more of a viable option in most situations. Next, I'm going to throw all my speed tabs on Robo because I'm going to be using him on for this particular dungeon. And I'm trying to bring all my characters up to 12 speed in general, so this brings Robo up to that point, which is nice. Now, as far as magic, I'd highly recommend that what I'm going to do is I'm going to beef everybody up and bring them all up to 17, just because I have enough magic tabs for that. But I do have more magic tabs than you probably do because I earned several in the Arena of Ages. Now, if you don't have as many magic tabs as I do, I would highly, highly, highly recommend you throw all of them on Ayla. This makes her Slurp Kiss and Inferno dual techs amazing, absolutely amazing, and I'll talk more about that later on in this video as well. So speaking of the Arena of Ages, I did also win a whole bunch of golden studs, so I'm going to throw that on these three characters. I'm using these three because this particular dungeon has a whole bunch of physical damage, and so you want a bunch of physical resist, and these three characters have the highest physical resist, so it just makes it a little bit nicer. You don't have to use these guys, but also Robo's kind of nice for being able to one-shot several of the different enemies as well, so he's just a nice character for this in general. The problem with him is he's slow, but I increased his speed, so now it's not that big of a deal. Now, next I'm going to explain a quick concept. So I showed how I could sneak past this fight. You don't have to do it at all, you just need to go into the right skull. But one quick concept to understand is when you defeat these enemies, then they each have something they drop. So the cave apes will drop a fang when defeated, and then meanwhile the purple reptite will drop a mid potion. However, if there are multiple of an enemy, you will only get up to one. You cannot get more than one for defeating them. So what I did is I charmed one of them, so I got the fang that it would have dropped when defeated, and then meanwhile I didn't charm the second one because I'm going to get it when combat ends. So notice this, I get a mid potion and a fang because I killed a purple reptite and I killed a cave ape. So that's the idea, is if you see multiple of a particular type of enemy, then you want to charm one of them so that you can get its drop, because it won't drop it when defeated because you can only get up to one when you defeat them. So here again, there's two reptites, they each have a mid potion on them, so I charmed one of them so I can get it. And now I'm just going to defeat both of them with my other two characters, and then when combat is over, I will get a mid-potion for the other purple reptite. Now, this particular mechanic is not to be confused with their regular charmable items. How it works is that if they don't have an item that you can charm, you will instead get their drop instead. Now, their drop will defaultly just give it to you at the end of combat, like so, but if you have more than one, you can only get up to one per type of enemy that's in that particular combat. Which is, I know it's an overly complicated explanation, but suffice to say, if you have Ayla with you for not all the areas in the game, but it's very noticeable in 65 million BC, you can get multiple items for each combat, and it's guarantees that you're just like a little bit over the top. Now, in general, as long as you have enough damage to get through it, or you're not taking much damage in general, I think it's totally fine. So in this case, like, one of them may end up punching me, but it doesn't do much damage anyways. But notice that I was totally able to kill this guy before he could even do anything, so it doesn't matter. So it just cost 4 MP for Ayla to be using Charm, but because I have the golden stud on her, it doesn't cost that much anyway, so it's not a big deal. So anyways, it's just a nice little way of getting just a little bit of boost on items. So here, for example, there's 3 of them, so if I charm 2 of them, then the last one will drop the remaining mid potion that I didn't acquire. Now, if you don't care about charming the extra potions off of these enemies, then something else you can do too is do something like put the silver or gold stud on Chrono and then have him use lightning too. Now, that's not going to be as much damage as Luca, for example, because her magic stat is just so much higher, so she's going to hit way harder with that ability. So Chrono's Lightning 2 just isn't as good, and so you're not going to kill them with Lightning 2, but you will take out half of their HP for all the enemies on the screen. The more enemies you have, obviously, the better that is. But one new thing you can do with that is if you have, like, instead of Robo, you have Frog, for example. Frog starts out with 11 speed, meanwhile Robo starts out with 8. So Robo's significantly slower defaultly. I have put a bunch of speed tabs on him, so now he has 12 speed, which is really great. But yeah, so if Ayla has 13 speed, Frog has 11 defaultly, then what happens is if you use Lightning 2, you can probably just be like smack smack with the other two characters, and then you'll probably be able to even have all 3 characters have their gauge appear again and smack them 3 more times. But each enemy will only take 1 more hit to kill them if they've already been whittled down with Lightning 2 a little bit. So anyways, point being, Lightning 2, smack, 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 you'll kill like everything, even if there's a whole bunch of enemies on the screen. So that would be a nice way to get through this whole area without spending too much NP, because if Chrono has, like, again, the golden stud on him, then that makes it so Lightning 2 only costs like 2, which isn't that much. Another alternative for that too is you can just use Cyclone, which is actually pretty cheap as well, and even if just because that only costs 2, if you use a like a silver stud on him, then it only costs 1. You don't need to use the golden stud for that particular ability, but the Cyclone is just pretty good by itself too. So if you want to whittle everybody down, then have everybody smack them, that'd be another way to get through here pretty nice. So once you get to the bottom of the right side, if you try and inspect the button next to the cage, then nothing happens, but if you inspect the cage itself, then Ayla will then climb into the cage with Kino, which seems like a terrible idea, but she's apparently just super overpowered and she can just burst through it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So we now have access to the cage where Kino is being held. Before you leave, you should go into his cage and open the nearby egg to get some goodies. Now what will happen is then Kino will go upstairs, and he actually, if you did not open the cage up above, there's a cage full of villagers in there, and if you did not open it yourself, then Kino will actually open it himself right now. This is actually definitely to our advantage because you can fall down into this cage later, and you will eventually just end up like stuck here if you did not have the cage open. So that's part of why they did it this way. But I think it's kind of cool, like, so I actually purposefully don't open this cage so that Kino will do it, just because I think it's kind of cool, the fact that he even does that. Anyways, go back to the left, and then back upstairs, he will then open the other skull. I don't know how he knows a trick to it for some reason. He's a prisoner. He apparently saw some secret way of doing it. But whatever, now we finally have access to the left side. In this room, there are some switches you can step on. What this will do is it will open up the floor, and it makes the enemies that are in that position fall down into that cage below that I was just talking about. Now, otherwise, if you go too far past the button, then you will end up fighting the enemies that are here. So here we have a new enemy called a Pterosaur. It's the upgraded version of the Megasaur that we saw in the Reptite Lair, but you can defeat it the same way. So just shock it with lightning and then go ahead and attack it with whatever you want. One interesting thing to note about this particular enemy is that it will drop a petal when defeated, but its charmable is a lapis, or at least defaultly it's a lapis. It can actually charm the petal as well, but most of the time you get a lapis instead, which is a more valuable item. Lapis are actually fairly expensive and they're kind of rare, so you don't actually see them very often, but a lot of enemies in this area actually drop them, so if you would like a bunch of lapis, this dungeon is a great place to do that. What lapis do is they will heal your whole party for 200, which is it's just like a mid potion, just does it for the whole party. But if you have 2 or 3 characters use lapis, you can heal your whole party very quickly, and it's really nice. So there are 2 enemies that you can charm lapis off of in this dungeon. There's the Pterosaurs and the Vulcanites. Now, the Vulcanites right here, these little rock enemies, are the biggest threat in this entire dungeon, in my opinion. So, unfortunately, they are weak to water, so if you had either Frog or Marl, here, Marl in particular, it's pretty easy to deal with them. You can just use Star Ice and they just get pwned by it. Now, otherwise, they are immune to Shadow, so if you use, like, Laser Spin or Supersonic Spin, that doesn't work. And they will actually heal from Lightning or Fire, so Luca is really bad against them, and it's just terrible. So, in general, I feel like it's safer overall to just use hard-hitting physical attacks. So if you use, like, Robo-Tackle is a really great way of dealing with them. So charm them with Ayla, and then what you can do is actually just use Robo-Tackle immediately afterwards. Right here, what I was doing is I was kind of waiting to see what they would drop, and then I actually missed that particular charm, so I'm going to stall here for a little bit. Now, this is a little bit excessive, but yeah, they do pretty decent damage to one of your characters, at least compared to everything else anyways. So I feel like they're the biggest threat. Also, just so you know, when combined with the Cave Apes will throw them as well to do additional damage to you. So when those 2 enemies are combined, it can be kind of awful. As I mentioned at the beginning of this dungeon, though, these are the 3 characters that have the highest physical resistance, so they're the ones that are going to have the most survivability. So if you have somebody like one of the girls especially, they can kind of get pwned here a little bit, so that can be a little bit rough. Now, if you decide that you do want to just rush through this as soon as possible and you don't really care about anything or whatever, just the best ability to use that wipes everything out is actually going to be Falcon Strike / Falcon Hit. It's a dual attack between Chrono and Ayla, and it's really, really good. So that's an amazing ability that will go ahead and just mow over all these guys all at once. So if you use that, just make sure, though, how it works is it's a line attack. It hits all the enemies in a line horizontally. So what you want to do is you want to aim, in this case I'm aiming at the middle Reptite to hit all of them at the same time. So the whole reason for going over to this right side is the fact that there's an egg that contains a high potion. It's just an optional thing. I don't really feel like that's super worthwhile. I'd rather use healing with my other characters in general, though. And besides, I feel like, you know, the Lapis we've been getting is far more worthwhile compared to the high potion itself, although that does heal one character really well. I think it heals for 500, so that's this left egg. So the left egg has the goodie, the right egg is a trap, so don't open that one. I'm just going to show it, doesn't really matter. It's also additional XP, but if you went ahead and used the buttons to drop the enemies from up above, where I was explaining that if you do that, it would land inside. This is inside the cell where the villagers were being held before. So this is where the enemies drop from if you end up dropping them here. And they can actually, I think they can even increase if you keep dropping them repeatedly. They don't have a whole bunch of enemies here all at once. So if you hit the right egg, you'll fall into this trap, and then you'll have to fight these guys. One other enemy worth commenting on too is that those pterosaurs earlier that I was talking about, the dinosaur-y looking enemies that drop the lapis, those guys are actually pretty rough because they have an ability that will set your HP to 1. So basically they charge at you and it knocks all your HP out, so that's one of the reasons why you want to stun them as soon as possible. I do feel like they're worth fighting because the Lapis is valuable, but just a quick stun with Chrono, with Lightning, will then make them vulnerable, but also more importantly is that it prevents them from using that really nasty attack that I was just talking about. So even though the Pterosaur is vulnerable to Lightning, I don't actually feel like most of the enemies are super... It's not super great to like super rely on Lightning 2 to try and whittle all these guys down. I was saying that's a viable strategy for the lower guys, but it doesn't work against the Vulcanites, remember that, because those guys are only vulnerable. They would actually heal them instead. So you want to use something other than Lightning. I think even it heals them and it causes their counterattack too. It's just awful, so it's just bad. So anyways, in general for this dungeon, I feel like physical attacks are more the way to go, and you can use either a really hard-hitting single techs or use some good dual techs. Now in general, just so you know, the really hard-hitting single techs cost more than the dual techs that can accomplish the same thing. Like for example, Falcon Strike / Falcon Hit costs 4 for Ayla and Chrono, meanwhile Frenzy / Confuse will do similar damage, but it costs 12 instead. So it's way more expensive, but if you have the Golden Stud on Chrono, then you can get away with that because it makes it more viable. But anyways, you get the idea. Meanwhile, like Robo Tackle can pretty much kill all this guy's one hit as well, and yet it only costs 3. So there's certain abilities that I think are more efficient overall. So Frenzy is an option. I don't really think it's super worth it, but otherwise, like, Cat Attack is good with Ayla, Robo Tackle is good with Robo. You can use Frenzy with Chrono, but it's a little bit much. You can use Cleave, but that usually isn't quite enough to do it. As far as dual techs that are great, I think the best one by far is going to be Falcon Strike / Falcon Hit. Other good ones is like Beast Toss is amazing between Ayla and Robo. That's a really good ability. You also have like Fire Whirl is really great. Cube Toss is an amazing ability as well, which is between Ayla and Marl. And I'll show that later on for a boss, but it's a really good ability. And there's a couple other dual techs that also will do well too, but you're kind of ideally looking at dual techs between, you're looking at between Chrono and whoever, and Ayla and whoever, so those are kind of the ones you want to consider. Now between Frog and Robo, I feel like overall Robo is the better choice for most of these regular fights, but you can totally use Frog as well. The problem with Frog is that he doesn't have quite as much physical resistance, he doesn't do quite as much damage, but he's a little bit faster. Unfortunately, his techs just cost more that do good damage. Leap Slash, otherwise known as Aerial Strike, it's just kind of expensive. It costs 4, so just a little bit more, but it does, I think the damage it does is similar to Robo Tackle, or maybe it's slightly more, but it's good for bosses. I think it's an amazing ability for bosses, but I feel like for a lot of the regular stuff, it's just a little bit too expensive to justify the amount of damage you get out of it. This combat can be kind of rough. I was actually trying to charm both the Pterosaur and the Vulcanite, but it was taking too long and I was getting nervous, so I decided to just go ahead and end the combat. But yes, I stunned the Pterosaur, and then things kind of dragged out a little bit too long. Now, if you want to end this faster, the best way, again, would be to use a Falcon Strike. It's just really, really good. It kills all these guys. I think even the Pterosaur, you don't even have to stun it or anything. I think it does enough damage to kill it in one hit. So if you're wanting to just rush through this and not worry about it, that would be your best bet. Alright, so this room is very confusing. How it works is there's all these like hidden floor tiles that will teleport you when you touch them. So if you touch the floor tiles, they'll teleport you somewhere else in the room. Our goal is to make our way to the far top right corner. However, there is a bunch of goodies that are in the room in eggs that we want to collect. So I'm going to show you the shortest path to the shortest number of teleports, the least confusing path to get all the goodies all at once. First, from this first platform, you want to go over to the far top right. This will take you to a teleporter. Go ahead and open the chest here. Then go to the bottom right here at this corner. This will teleport you to the top right corner. Open up this chest, go left. This will teleport you again. And then from here, you want to go south, just straight south, and then go left and open up this egg. Go back to the right side. Don't go through the left side. Go back to the right, then go up, and you can finally get this chest and continue on towards the stairs. Now, if you want to, you can go a little bit south here and fight this combat as well. This is the other combat that is in this room. Now, a quick comment on the dual techs between Chrono and Ayla's. They have Drill Kick, which is just bad. It's just not a good ability. They also have Thunder Chomp / Volt Bite, and they also have Falcon Strike / Falcon Hit. Now, as far as those two are worthwhile. Now, when you want to use them, just so you know, Thunder Chomp costs only 5 MP total, meanwhile, Falcon Strike costs 8 total. But the amount of damage they do is actually just about the same. The difference is that Thunder Chomp only hits one target, and it's half lightning, half physical. And meanwhile, Falcon Strike is only physical, but it hits multiple targets. So that's the reason. It costs more, but it's physical only, which is actually pretty interesting because most of the really hard-hitting physical dual techs are they're really cheap. They don't cost a lot of MP. So Falcon Strike is actually one of the highest cost and thus highest damage physical dual techs that you have. The reason that's important to know is because it's just a really good ability for killing a bunch of enemies in general. But because if you're fighting enemies that are immune to magic, for example, then you want to use dual techs that do only physical. Most of them do both magical and they do half magical, half physical. So that one's one of the only exceptions in the game that only does physical. So that's a really good physical only tech. So going up above in this next area, there is 3 combats right here. Actually, you can avoid all of them by just hanging out along the top wall, so just go right up there. But otherwise, there's 3 of them in a row. They're kind of these pressure plates, like there's 3 of them in a row. So there's one kind of at the top, one kind of in the middle, and one at the very bottom. But the very, very, very top, you can sneak through there and go through. So I'm just going to fast forward through all this combat. It's all pretty basic, whatever. I am going to kill them on purpose just for the extra XP, but also because I want to steal some lapis. So up ahead, there are 3 combats, and I'm going to show where those pressure plates are. So there's one just to the north of me right here, there's one just to the right of me right there, and there's also one just to the right of me right here. So you can actually kind of sneak in between a little bit. You pretty much have to kill one of them, though, to get through here. So anyways, here's the top one, which is, again, so it's kind of 3 different pressure plates that are diagonal. And so it makes this little line going kind of from the middle doorway down to the bottom right of, like, just below the right doorway, basically. So I'm kind of getting sick of fighting these guys now, so I decided to use some Falcon Strikes, but this combat is pretty easy. If there's too many enemies, if there's like 4 or more, I'm using Falcon Strike. If there's 3 or less, then I'm going ahead and charming for lapis whenever I can. Now, in this next room, what you want to do is step on the red button. This will then open the skull, and so you can just continue onwards. And then otherwise, if you step on the left one, it's a trap and causes enemies to drop. I'm going to go ahead and do it on purpose because both of these enemies will give me a lapis, and I want it. I need it. Now, as a comment, though, too, for a lot of these fights, I've been using Falcon Strike with Ayla and Chrono, and because I'm doing that, that means my 3rd slot isn't doing anything. Now, what would be smart is if you're going to use that strategy instead and just kill everything as soon as possible, then what I'd recommend you do is actually have the person in your 3rd slot that you want to get the most TP. Because all of your characters get XP. The people that are not in your active party get a little bit less XP, but it's slightly complicated how that works, actually. But they don't earn any TP. The only people that earn TP, experience towards learning abilities, is people in your active party. So, if you're not using your 3rd party member and they're just sitting there because Chrono and Ayla are killing everything instead, then it'd be better to put somebody in that slot that you want to earn a bunch of TP with that is kind of lagging behind. Now, in my particular case, both Robo and Frog are probably the lowest TP characters I currently have, so either one of them is kind of good for me. So I'm glad that I'm using Robo, but just be aware of that. So once you get to the end of this whole right side, you want to go ahead and press the switch. This will then open the doorway in the middle outside, so go ahead and go back there, and you can either use a Falcon Strike right away, would be smart, otherwise you can go ahead and try and get some lapis off of the Vulcanites. So in the next room, we have a boss fight, and this is Nizbel, which you've actually faced him against him before. You can actually talk with this guy, and he will then tell you to go forward, which is kind of weird. So you can weave around him, and there is a sparkly here. So go ahead and use some shelters to heal up your characters, and then as you continue on forward, then he will then confront you, and you have to fight him. So who do I recommend for this fight? I recommend any of the 3 healers. You can use either Robo, Frog, or Marl. Marl is overall probably the best, but Frog is pretty sweet too, and I want to show some of his heals for that. But otherwise, potentially you can technically use Lapis as well. Lapis will heal all of our characters for 200, which is awesome. It's a full party heal, and we got a whole bunch of them by charming, if you charmed anyways. Now from this point onward, Square decided to start recycling some of the bosses, or at least their graphics in any ways, and I assume that's just to save on development costs, is the reasoning for that. But just so you know, every single boss that you fight in the entire game is unique. They are not the same boss. So even though Nizbel II here looks very similar to Nizbel I, and there are in fact different characters and everything, this boss does not fight like the previous one. So he has a completely different toolkit or whatever, and so you do not use the same strategies that we used on the previous boss. So just a quick disclaimer before we move on. So this boss has a funky mechanic that's kind of complicated to explain. So when you use lightning, it will decrease his defenses and increases the damage he takes from everything. And then meanwhile, if you use anything else, anything other than lightning, then this will go the other direction, and it actually will increase his defenses and make him take less damage from everything. Now, if you only use physical or other elements, then what you'll find is that very quickly you'll get to the point where he's not taking any damage at all, and you have to use lightning. So that's what you have to do, is you have to keep using lightning with Chrono. So you can either use Star Lightning and just keep doing that over and over again, and that will increase the amount of damage he's taking. However, just so you know, when you do use any kind of lightning ability on him, then he will eventually follow up with an electrical discharge, which does a lot of damage to your whole party, and that's actually the worst attack that this boss has. But you have to use lightning, you don't have a choice. So just be ready with your 3rd party member. I would highly recommend you have a healer in that slot, and then otherwise you can use Lapis, but just be ready to start using heals to heal everybody. If you have Frog or Robo, then you want to use either Star Heal or Heal Beam. And then if you have Marl, then you're going to have to use either Aura or Cure. Remember, if everybody has like 150 health damage taken, you can use Aura. If they have more than that, then use Star Cure. Now, whenever the boss uses Electric Discharge, this will then remove all the debuffs off him and bring him back to regular 100%, and that's the, so that you're going to have to reapply all that lightning debuff on him. Now, regardless of how debuffed the boss is, it will always do about 180 damage to all your characters. Now, characters that have lower magical defense will take more damage in general, so Ayla and Robo in particular will take a lot of damage from this. Meanwhile, all your other characters won't be too bad. Frog and Chrono are like okay. Meanwhile, Maro and Luca don't take very much damage at all from this ability, or anywhere in comparison anyways. So the best ability to use by far is going to be Thunder Chomp / Volt Bite, because this will do electric damage to him, so it doesn't cause his defenses to go up. Now, just so you know, like I was explaining before, is that Lightning does not get the increase on damage from the debuff. So if you just keep using Lightning, it will always do the same amount of damage every single time. So when you use Thunder Chomp / Volt Bite like I'm doing right here, what happens is the electric portion of the attack always stays the same. It's Ayla's physical damage. That portion of the dual tech is what's going up in damage, just so you know. So one of the reasons why that's important to point out is because one possible strategy for this, for example, is to use Star Lightning, Star Lightning, Star Lightning, Star Lightning as soon as possible. So you can do things like put on, because if Chrono's only doing that, then you can do things like equip him with the Slasher and like a speed belt to do lightning damage as fast as possible, so that you can then follow up with a dual tech like Falcon Strike, for example, which, as I was explaining earlier on in this video, that is one of the highest damage physical dual techs that you have. And what will happen is if you can get that to do 170% damage, it hits really, really hard. So that's a good thing you can use. Just in general, though, Thunder Chomp / Volt Bite is the way to go. It's so much easier, so just use that the whole time. It's actually one of the highest damage electric dual techs that you have right now. So if you use Marl, then just go ahead and haste everybody. It was just a super good thing, super good ability. If you're going to use Frog, then use Star Heal, and then otherwise don't do anything, because you don't want to cause his defenses to go up. Now, one fun thing you can do, though, to increase your damage is either on Robo or Frog in particular, go ahead and put on the Rage Band, because the boss has a lot of these attacks that hit the whole party like this, and what happens is Frog will counterattack and do physical damage. Now, the reason that's cool, especially if he crits, is that if the boss is taking increased, remember that the percentage thing, his defenses, that Lightning cuts through all that, it doesn't change that at all. What it affects is physical damage. So what's cool about that is because Frog crits really hard and he's countering, then he can potentially crit and do a really hefty amount of damage, especially if the boss is taking increased damage from physical. So now that I'm watching this recording after the fact, I've come up with another strategy which might be kind of cool for this. So, you know, like I was saying in the last fight, Falcon Strike / Falcon Hit is the highest damage physical tech, dual tech that we have access to right now, and it's straight up physical. Most of our other techs, like Thunder Chomp, for example, are a combination of elemental and physical. So a straight-up physical damage would do the most amount of damage to him if you can get his percentage up really high. Now, one way that you can probably do that really simply is just do Thunder Chomp, Falcon Strike, because you're going to do a whole bunch of damage to him. You're going to do 46% more damage, but then he's going to just use an Electric Discharge and reset it all back to 100% anyways. Who cares if you increase his defense? He's going to reset it back to 100% as it is. So if you do it in that order, Thunder Chomp, Falcon Strike, you'll do the most damage possible, which is really great. Now, as a quick comment, too, by the way, is that it seems like from these recordings, it makes it look like he's counterattacking once we reach 170%. That's not actually true. In fact, I didn't have it in this particular recording, but I did test that, and I recorded all my damage numbers and stuff like that to get the math for this, but there is definitely points when he hangs out on 170% for a little while. It just isn't happening very often when I use Thunder Chomp, so I'm not entirely sure why that is. Maybe it's because I'm doing so much damage, because regular attacks, when I was using just Star Lightning and like Ayla's regular attack, I was alternating back and forth, and he was getting up to 170% more often. So I think maybe it's a damage threshold as part of what it is that forces the Electric Discharge to happen a little bit early. I'm not entirely sure what's dictating that, but just know that it is possible to get up to 170%, but you have to be using lower tier abilities to prevent him from using a discharge. One final thing to comment on is the fact that this boss has a third eye that you can charm off him with Ayla. I actually did that in my Marl recording, so I now have 3 third eyes total. I got one from this battle, we got one from the Arena of Ages, and I got one from a new in the Hunting Grounds here in 65 million BC. So I have 3 of them right now, which is kind of a lot. I feel like overall it's just kind of an okay item. I actually feel like it's more useful in New Game Plus. And the reason is because at that point, like, most of your stats are starting to max out, so like a magic ring and a power ring are kind of worthless at that point. Meanwhile, a third eye will still it'll still double your evasion, which your evasion is like one of the last stats you're going to max out, so it's a really nice item for when you're min-maxing your characters like really late game. Kind of like in the level 60 to 70 range, kind of like in there. Third eye can be kind of cool for that. So Third Eye has officially been upgraded from garbage to kind of garbage. Yes. In this next area, you can use an S shape to get through here. Just go like down and then up and around, and you can get through there without fighting in combat. The two pressure plates for this is in the top left, and to the bottom right is where these ones on the left side are located. So at this point, I'm doing a couple different combats with some of my other characters to unlock some dual techs real quick. In particular, I wanted to get Slurp Kiss between Frog and Ayla, because I guess I just haven't had them together in a fight yet. I did show that last combat, but this particular recording was actually the playthrough that I did with doing Marl with that boss fight, so I didn't actually get Slurp Kiss yet. So anyways, I'm just unlocking that real quick, as well as with Luca, I can get Fire Sword 2, which is a little bit nicer version of that as well. It's kind of expensive though. But anyways, Slurp Kiss is one of the best healing abilities in the entire game. Super, super strong. Really, really good ability. So if you're looking at doing a full party heal and you're not sure which characters to use, Ayla and Frog is a really safe choice. Now in order to pull that off though, you do need to have some pretty high magic stat on Ayla. So that's one of the reasons why I gave her a whole bunch of magic capsules earlier in the beginning of this video. It's a super powerful thing, and you'll see what I mean. It just is pretty overpowered, but yeah, giving Ayla magic is very, very strong, just so you know. Now the pressure plate for this area over to the right is just right here at this top left corner. You can just swerve around it. It's really easy. So I'm going to go ahead and step on it just so you can see where it is. But this just has a single Avian Rex. Super easy. You can go ahead and kill that. Unfortunately, the only goodie we get from this is just a feather, which I have many feathers at this point, so I don't really care about that. But easy enemy to kill, free XP, why not? In the next room, all we have to do to proceed is just to interact with the skull to the north. You don't actually have to step on a switch at all, so just weave past them. And if you interact with the skull with A, this will then cause it to open and you can walk through. So that's all we have to do. Meanwhile, the middle switch will give you a sparkly where you can save. The right one will cause you to initiate combat with these enemies. Meanwhile, the left one will open up a pit that can cause the enemies to fall down. Now remember that you do want to stun them first, because otherwise they will counterattack like this. But yes, you can go ahead and charm both of them to get a Lapis if you want to, just because that is a very nice item. And you can use Lapis in boss fights as well, and that would be pretty good. Like, we could have used Lapis in that last boss fight, and that would have been a decent option. Now, also, too, if you are worried about these guys attacking you super fast, you can also use Lightning 2 instead, and that is a totally viable option, too. As I said before, these guys have a pretty nasty attack where they can reduce your HP to 1, just like News do, and so that can be pretty awful. So, if one of them does that, the other one brings fire, then they can just wipe you out, and it can be kind of sad. So, just know that that is a thing. Ideally, you want to use Lightning first to stop them from doing that, or just hit them really, really hard with something. Again, just about all of the combat in this entire dungeon can be completed using Falcon Strike. So again, the right one causes enemies to attack you, the left one opens up a pit, the middle one gives you a sparkly. Meanwhile, the skull itself, if you interact with it, will open it, which will lead to an egg that has some goodies in it, and a switch which opens up the door outside. So I recommend you get the sparkly. It's just kind of a nice place to save and use shelters, although it doesn't really matter that much. Like, honestly, if you end up just going to the back to the Nizbel room, that boss room just a little bit ago, it's not that much further, actually. It's actually about the same distance, so don't worry about it too much. If you find that whole right side stressful and you can't remember which button it is, just don't worry about it at all. Just go to the left instead. So that switch we just pressed to the right opened up this door over here in the middle, and as you approach it, you'll then fight 2 different battles in a row with pterosaurs. Not a big deal. I'm going to go ahead and charm the Lapis off them, but nothing much else to say about them. Just stun them with lightning and beat them up. Alright, so after that quick confrontation with Azala, you can then continue on to the room to the north to face off against the boss. Real quick, there is some preparation we can do. You want to open up the nearby eggs to get some goodies, and now I'd highly recommend you go back to a save point. You can either go off to the left and enter the Nizbel room, or you can continue on to the right, and then step on the middle switch to create a save point here that you can use a shelter at and save. The first thing to know about this boss is it has a really hard-hitting single-target physical attack, which is just awful, and then other than that, so it can just wipe somebody out. And the other thing it has is it has a full-party, massive fire damage attack, and that hurts really, really bad. So you can actually avoid a lot of that damage by simply putting on the Ruby Vest. Now, I realize that was a chest piece that we kind of out-leveled a little bit, so we have some nicer chest pieces at this point, but you should totally hang on to those for a while because it halves fire damage. So you should put the Ruby Vest on all of your characters to reduce the damage they take by half for the fire attack, and that's super nice. This does reduce their physical damage resistance, but it's not too bad. And then meanwhile, you should put the Triceratoppers. We only have a couple of those. You should put them on whoever has the lowest physical defense are the characters that should have that. Now, as far as accessories, if Chrono has learned Frenzy/Confuse, you should totally give him the gold stud, and that is the best item for him. Now, meanwhile, if he has not learned that, then you should give the gold stud to Ayla. Otherwise, you can also give Ayla a power item, and the reason for this is just so you know, Ayla, a lot of her abilities scales with her power stat. So I mean, this happens with a lot of people's physical stats, physical techs, but Ayla gets more benefit from it. She has higher multipliers for her power stat than any other character in the game. So she gets more benefit from it than anybody else. So if you have, in particular, a power ring, if you have that, definitely use that. It's the highest strength plus item that you have. Really, really good. Now, as far as Marl, I'd still recommend speed would still be the thing I'd recommend, but otherwise you can totally give her a plus to magic item because that will increase her healing. So, who do I recommend you take for this fight? And the answer to that is you want a whole bunch of physical damage. So, obviously the correct choice if you want to do a whole bunch of physical damage is Marl, you know, because she increases your speed is why, it's part of the reason. The other reason is that actually the dual tech she has with Ayla, Ice Toss, is a pretty good ability, and it does a lot of damage for this particular fight. It does about the same damage as Thunder Chomp/Volt Bite / Falcon Strike. Both of those two abilities do about the same amount of damage as Ice Toss, so they're both just really, really good. As I mentioned earlier, if you have Red Plate that we won from the Arena of Ages, that would be even more overpowered. That will heal you when you take fire damage instead, which just makes this boss stupidly easy. It's just crazy. But so that would be amazing. So you can, if you want to cheat, you can totally put that on. I'm not going to because I want to show like the legit strategies and stuff, but very, very good item for this fight. The second best character for this fight is definitely going to be Frog because he has Slurp Kiss, which is amazing, and he also has Aerial Strike, otherwise known as Leap Slash. Now, I actually don't have enough TP on him to unlock it right now, so that's why I didn't use him for this particular fight, but he is a really good choice for this. And lastly, that would be Robo, and Robo has just Robo Tackle. It's just kind of okay. It just is physical damage. That's what we want, is we want physical damage for this fight. And coming in last place is Luca, who has nothing to offer for this fight at all. So first I'm going to show the Robo fight because this is more of like a traditional fight that you're probably going to experience for this. Is what you're going to see online a lot, and if you're watching other people's videos, this is something like this is probably more likely what you're going to end up seeing. So first of all, the first thing I'd recommend is charm both of the bosses with Ayla. So definitely do that first because you can get a Magic Capsule and Strength Capsule, which is really awesome. So do that first before you forget. Next, the first thing to know as far as how to fight this boss is that Black Tyrano has really high defenses, and so you're not going to be able to harm it yet until it lowers its defenses. So in the meantime, while it's still getting ready for that and we're not actually ready to attack it yet, then you're much better off fighting Azala. And Azala doesn't really have that much health anyway, so you should totally take her out first. Now, she is pretty resistant to physical, but she's much more vulnerable to magic, and in particular to lightning. So lightning does the most damage, physical does the least, and then other magic does kind of a medium amount. So what I'd recommend you do is have Chrono use Star Lightning for sure, and then you can have Ayla just regular smack her when she's available. But otherwise, you can also use like Cat Attack if you want to. I think it's kind of a waste of MP. I would save it for the boss, but just have her use regular attacks in the meantime. Now, with your third party member, use some kind of magic ability. Just anything elemental is what you want to do. So even with Robo, just use Laser Spin, even though I know that's like full screen and it's kind of not very efficient as far as MP cost and everything, but it's still the best ability you have that he can use. You can use like Supersonic Spin or something, but it's just not worth it because Chrono is better off using Star Lightning because she is more vulnerable to lightning specifically. So Azala also has a couple other abilities. One of them is just a teleportation where she summons a rock and then it lands on top of you. It does pretty decent physical damage, but it's not really that big a deal. She also has Psychokinesis, and what that does is it does physical damage, but it can also put your characters to sleep. It's a very rare chance for that to happen, so it's usually not an issue, but just know that it is a thing. The scariest thing in this fight is probably going to be the Black Tyrano's Chomp ability. What this does is it sucks up somebody and steals a bunch of life from them, which actually, it hurts really bad. So you want to make sure you have at least like 250 health or more at least, because otherwise that can totally just one-shot you. So make sure all of your party stays above that, and then try and take out Azala as soon as possible. So once she's taken enough damage, Azala will use Azala Break or Azala Wrath, which will apply HP down. And this is a status effect that it doesn't really have like a set debuff on you or anything. It's actually not even listed as the regular debuffs, but what it does is it makes you slowly lose HP over time, just like 1 HP every second for a little while. And then it finally wears off and it's not a big deal. But yes, it's basically a poison. So she applies poison to the whole party. Not really a big deal. You can kind of just ignore it. So next what you want to do is you want to get your health all up and then just wait for the boss to say that its defenses are lowered. Until then, you basically do no damage at all. You can smack it, but it doesn't do anything. Now, once the defenses are lowered, this boss is in particular more vulnerable to physical. Now, you can use magical, it just isn't as good. Now, as far as good physical attacks you can use, you just want to use whatever the highest physical thing is that you have. You can use single techs, like you can use Cat Attack, or Frenzy/Confuse, or Cleave, or Robo Tackle. Otherwise, for Frog, if you have Aerial Strike, otherwise known as Leap Strike, or Leap Slash, that's a really good ability as well. I actually didn't have enough TP on Frog to do that. But yes, just unleash as much physical damage as you possibly can. Now, otherwise, if you can't come up with any bright ideas for something to use, then you can just use Volt Bite. Now, ironically, Volt Bite/Thunder Chomp. Now, ironically enough, this actually does very similar damage to Falcon Strike. Falcon Strike does a little bit more damage, but it costs significantly more mana. So I feel like Thunder Chomp/Volt Bite is just a little bit safer overall, or just, it's not that much less damage, but it costs almost half as much MP, so it's just a little bit more efficient. So the other biggest challenge with this boss is the fact that he roars and counts down, and then eventually he unleashes this nasty fire attack. Now, the damage of that can be somewhere between 200 to like 700 damage. Which is, I know it's a huge variance, but it hurts a lot. And so if you're really high level, you have enough magic defense, you can probably survive it, or if you have a good fire resistance. So the easiest way to get fire resistance is to wear the ruby vests that you can buy from Ioka Village here in 65 million BC. So we've actually already out-leveled that a little bit. We have some Mesozoic mail and stuff, but which are much higher defense. But the magic defense is really what matters in this, and so the ruby vests will have fire damage. And the whole reason they gave it to us, they let us buy those, is because we can use them for this boss. And in fact, I think there was even some people in Ioka Village that gave us the tip about that that's what you want to use it for, is big dinosaurs that can cast fire stuff. So, how you survive this is wear the ruby vests, and then that way you can survive this nasty fire attack that he's going to unleash. Now you can also bring Luca, because the Tabin vest also has fire damage, and she also has really high magic resist, so she can probably survive. So if it comes down to it and you don't have any ruby vests, I don't know why that would be the case, but if you really, really wanted to do that and you were desperate, you could have just Luca with a Tabin vest, and then everybody else will probably die to the fire, and you can have her revive everybody instead, just using Athenian water/revives. So that would be another way you could kind of get through this sort of. Then you'd have to res everybody and try again, but I just feel like Luca's a terrible choice for this fight, because she just does only magic damage. This boss is only vulnerable to physical. Like, sure, she'd be great against Azala, but Azala dies really fast anyway, so it's kind of pointless. So after the big fire attack, the boss has raised his defenses again, so you can go in and smack him, but you don't do much damage. What you want to do is use this opportunity to res everybody and heal everybody up. You can use Ayla's Kiss. It's very inexpensive, so you can totally do that on the, especially the guys that aren't hurt very much. Have her kiss them, then have Robo or Frog or Marl heal the more damaged people, and then just try to heal up as soon as possible, because once the boss uses his chomp ability, he can totally just destroy somebody, so try and get everybody up as soon as possible. Now, otherwise, you can just attack the boss regularly at this point, but because his defenses are up, you don't do very much damage, so I'd actually recommend you don't. And the reason I say that is because I would rather have my action gauge full, for as soon as the boss lowers his defense, bam, I can just unleash 1,800 damage in quick succession. Like, rather than hitting them with my regular attacks and doing like 10 to 40 damage, it's just not worth it. You know what I mean? Like, sure, I could do 200 damage, but why would I want to do that when if I stall for just a couple more seconds, I can do significantly more damage? One other fun tactic you can use with this boss is, notice when the boss roars like this, that is actually considered an attack. And because of that, it can be countered. So if you throw the Rage Band on one of your characters, there's a 50% chance that your character will counter and smack the boss. And by the way, the boss only roars when his defenses are down anyway, so you do a physical damage attack that hits really hard. Now, as far as who to put the Rage Band on, I just basically would recommend anybody but Ayla, and the reason for that is because Ayla is much more beneficial to give her a power item. So if you give her a power ring or a power scarf or something, it just increases the damage of her techs so much that I think that's more worthwhile, and just makes her techs hit a lot harder. So meanwhile, other characters, they don't get as much benefit. The multipliers for their damage is a little bit lower for the strength/power stats, so other characters would get more benefit out of the Rage Band specifically. They'll do more damage total comparatively to Ayla having that on. So anyways, give Ayla a power item, have another character, either Chrono or Frog or Robo, wear the Rage Band. So next I'm going to show the battle again, this time slightly more optimized, so you can see a more intense, and the highest damage character you can possibly bring for this fight is actually Marl, which seems completely counterintuitive. I was just saying that this boss is resistant to magic, so why would bringing a caster make the most sense? A couple reasons. We need a healer, she has haste, and she has some really good dual techs that we can use for this fight. So I'll explain more about that in a little bit. The first thing that I would recommend you do is charm the boss, both of them. So charm Azala for a magic capsule and charm Black Tyrano for a strength capsule. So do that before you forget. If I just charm Azala, then I always forget and I end up not doing Black Tyrano. So just make sure you get it out of the way, get it taken care of right now. Meanwhile, with Chrono, again, Azala is weak to lightning, so just keep using Star Lightning, or you can use Thunder Trump if you want. I'd recommend Star Lightning in this case because this boss is also weak to magic, so the next damaging attack you can use Star Ice or Ice 2. Not as good, you can do a little bit more damage if you make it a dual tech. So instead of Ayla just doing like a regular auto attack, which is terrible, you can do like triple the damage by doing Ice Toss instead. As far as equipment, everybody has a Ruby Vest to reduce fire damage again. As far as accessories, I have a speed belt on Marl to make her a little bit faster. Chrono is actually going to be using a ton of MP for this particular fight that as you'll see. I'm going to have him use Frenzy/Confuse, which costs 12 MP, very expensive, so I gave him a gold stud to make that cost not as horrible. And then meanwhile for Ayla, now normally I would put a strength/power item on her, like the power ring, but instead for this particular fight, what I decided to do for this particular team composition, I thought it made more sense to put the rage band on her. So she is counterattacking for this fight like I was explaining a little bit ago. So one of the things that happened at this point is I charmed Black Tyrano repeatedly and it just would not work, so finally I just got fed up and I used Twin Charm, which is something you can do. It's a dual tech between Ayla and Marl, which increases the chance of it being successful. So I was able to successfully charm the boss before he started counting down. Now instead of hasting at the beginning of the fight, another alternative is to start hasting now because we're waiting for the boss anyway, so this nice little lull right here is when you can start getting your characters ramped up and start getting them really, really fast. So like I've explained a couple different times in this video, Falcon Strike is our highest damage pure physical tech that we have available right now. Unfortunately, it is very expensive, so in this particular fight, it doesn't do that much more damage, so I feel like Thunder Chomp/Volt Bite just makes more sense. Just don't even bother with Falcon Strike, use Thunder Chomp because it's way cheaper. Now, as far as other characters, I'm not even going to list the techs that are just bad. So, for example, Star Ice, Star Fire, they're both really terrible because this boss is resistant to magic. However, he is fairly vulnerable to Fire Sword 2. Fire Sword 2 does great damage because most of the damage comes from Chrono's physical, is where that all comes from. So, if you have Luca, use Fire Sword 2 and Ayla's Cat Attack is what you want to do, and you can do the most damage you could possibly do with that particular team composition. Now, the highest damage of all the various character combinations is actually to do Frenzy/Confuse with Chrono, very expensive ability, wear the gold stud, and then meanwhile have Ayla and Marl use Ice Toss. Ice Toss does pretty decent damage to this boss, actually. It's barely less than Thunder Chomp just by itself, and then meanwhile Chrono's doing like 2 or 3 times as much damage as Robo was doing, so it's just really, really good. So that in and of itself is good. We're doing like, I don't even know, 300 to 500 more damage per turn than we were with the previous team composition, but we're also, because we're all hasted, we're going twice as often, so we're doing way more damage. Now in the last fight, I just barely killed him before he unleashed his second fire attack, but for this particular combat, I'm actually going to kill him before he even gets off his first one, which is kind of nuts. We kill this boss really, really fast. I know, like, time-wise, as far as YouTube video duration, it doesn't feel like it's that much faster, but the deal is, too, just realize, like, time is paused during these attacking animations. So, as far as the actual time elapsed for the fight, we're doing this significantly faster. And, of course, to top it all off, the little cherry on top is the fact that Ayla is also using the Rage Band to counterattack whenever the boss roars as well, so just even more damage. It's just dumb. As far as healing goes, Marl can use Aura or Star Cure. Meanwhile, Robo can use Cure Beam or Heal Beam, and that'll heal the whole party. Meanwhile, if you have Frog, the best combination for that is actually to use Star Heal to heal the whole party a little bit. Otherwise, you can also use either like a mid potion or something to heal just one person, or what's better than that is actually the dual tech Slurp Kiss with Ayla. So if somebody's really hurt, even if it's just one person that's really, really hurt, like when the boss chomps, then you want to use the dual tech Slurp Kiss if you have Frog in your party instead. I know that feels counterintuitive, we're using like a full party heal to heal one person, but it heals significantly more than Slurp and Kiss separately, which are single target heals anyway, and it heals the whole party, and it's really inexpensive. It's just good. It's just a good ability. So if one person's hurt really bad, use Slurp Kiss. I find this all very impressive, like from a writing standpoint. That's such an interesting take on why the dinosaurs went extinct, is that they summoned the meteor on purpose to try and wipe out humanity as a last-ditch effort to keep the Earth out of humanity's hands. Like, what? Survival of the fittest? It's like survival of the fittest to an extreme, kind of, but like, I don't know. It's just, I did not expect them to be the ones summoning the meteorite, but also the fact that the meteorite is actually the big boss, basically. It's like disturbing in multiple ways, but that's super interesting. Like, what a crazy thing. Like, good job, writing team. Well done. So, at this point, you can go to the bottom right corner and you can ride the dactyls back over to Ioka Village if you want to. And what you'll find is that the happy water has actually dried up, and the people of the village are concerned because they can't heal anymore, and they're not sure what they're going to do because they don't have magical water anymore, which, that's disturbing. Not sure what that means, but they're going to have to figure out some other way to survive moving forward. So, when you're ready to proceed, all you have to do is enter the ruins of the crater of Tyrano Lair, and you'll find a gate here. So, go ahead and hop into it to go to a new time period. So that actually concludes this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this and found it helpful, be sure to throw a like on it, subscribe, all that good stuff, and stay tuned for more content just like this. As always, you guys are awesome, you have an amazing day, and I'll see you next time.